She has started an argument again, and you hear her voice rising in pitch, listing every mistake, even the most insignificant one, that you have made since the moment you met. This is not just a list, it is a carefully orchestrated verbal barrage designed to make you feel guilty and suppressed. At this critical moment, an instinctive, almost reflex desire arises to defend yourself, to explain why you are right, to unleash facts and logic upon her to prove her wrong. You feel the internal pressure growing, demanding an immediate response. This is your reactive brain striving to restore equilibrium. Your lips are already prepared to release a stream of carefully prepared counter-arguments, which you naively hope will put an end to this madness. But suddenly, something inside you stops this impulse. It is the sudden realization that participating in this game is defeat by definition. You take a deep breath and close your mouth. You look at her calmly, without looking away, maintaining an expression of absolute tranquility on your face, demonstrating a complete lack of emotional involvement, and you do not utter a single word. Your calm is an impenetrable shield that cannot be pierced by words or emotional attacks. This pause, this conscious silence you have chosen creates an instant and incredibly strong, almost tangible vacuum tension in the air. You become emotionally unreachable. Her pressure suddenly weakens, her emotional flywheel loses inertia, and the habitual rhythm of the quarrel, from which she drew strength, breaks. She loses her footing, the habitual target for her anger. Her attack is calculated on your reaction, and when the reaction does not come, her energy dissipates. She is no longer fighting your resistance. She is performing for an audience that has just refused to participate. It is as if an actress on stage suddenly discovered that all the spectators had left the hall. The power dynamic has shifted in an instant, and she does not understand what has happened, feeling uncomfortable and disoriented in this new, uncontrolled silence. Her manipulative program has glitched, and she remains alone with her own emotional chaos. Silence as an attribute of power. Welcome to the most powerful tool in the arsenal of psychological dominance, strategic silence. This is not the silence of defeat, nor a sign of weakness or submission, but on the contrary, the silence of absolute control over the situation and, more importantly, over one's own emotional state. It is your psychological fortress that cannot be taken by storm. Today, we will reveal how to use this powerful means to win a woman's deep, unwavering respect without entering into a verbal confrontation with her. This method is not just a refusal to speak, it is an active demonstration of your inner strength, imperturbability, and high psychological intelligence. Your silence speaks louder than any logic because it signals a complete lack of need for someone else's approval. You refuse to waste energy on a meaningless verbal struggle. Most men mistakenly believe that winning an argument requires superior argumentation, better facts, or witty rhetoric, believing that a verbal duel is won only by verbal superiority. They believe that the person with the most convincing logic or the fastest reaction will emerge victorious, and this belief keeps them trapped in a contest they cannot win. Every time you enter a verbal skirmish with a woman, you are effectively stepping onto her territory, accepting her rules, and picking up her methods. You are competing in a trial where the rules are constantly changing, and victory is determined not by objective truth, but by the art of emotional manipulation. They make you dance to their tune while you try to appeal to common sense. The more you speak, the more material you give her for further attacks, creating a vicious circle. It is time to realize that for her, this argument is emotional theater, not a search for a solution. And in this theater, you are the only spectator who has the right to leave. Female tactics and the impotence of logic. Women brilliantly master the art of verbal confrontation not because their logic is flawless, but because they deeply understand arguments are not actually about finding the truth or facts, but about power, control, and emotional superiority. While you vainly try to win with the arguments of reason, she gains the upper hand using psychological pressure, emotional blackmail, and the subtle stance of a strategic victim. She masterfully uses your emotions as her main currency. Your logic proves powerless against her emotional attacks because you are on different levels of communication. You are on the logical, she is on the emotional, and these levels do not intersect. As soon as you open your mouth to defend yourself, you have already lost, because you signal that her opinion is of such importance to you that you feel the need to change it. You are, in essence, demonstrating that her criticism has power over your internal state and that you need her approval so much that you are ready to fight for it to the last. This reveals your dependence on her validation and confirms her superiority in the emotional sphere. This desperate, almost unhealthy need to be understood, to prove one's rightness, and to have the final say is exactly what dooms men to endless, exhausting cycles of fruitless conflicts that burn their energy but only strengthen her position of power. You become emotionally exhausted while she consolidates her control. Every word in your defense becomes irrefutable proof of your inner weakness, and every argument presented is evidence of your insecurity. It is as if you are saying, "Please, admit I am right," and this plea cannot be a manifestation of strength. The only winning move in any verbal battle is to refuse to play. The only real way to retain power in an argument is to withdraw from participating in it, leaving the battlefield empty. The psychology of the mirror effect. To master this silence, it is necessary to understand the deep psychological mechanisms that feed the female desire for arguments. Women do not argue with the goal of discovering the truth or achieving mutual understanding. Their true goal is to establish dominance, control your emotions, and achieve external validation because they want to draw an emotional reaction out of you that will confirm their significance. Consequently, their arguments function on an emotional rather than a logical level, and often the content of the disagreement itself is completely irrelevant. Only the emotional dynamic she creates matters. Her true goal is not to convince you of her rightness, but to make you feel insecure, guilty, or force you into a defensive position. She strives to provoke a reaction in you to shift the focus from herself, induce a sense of guilt, or force you to accept her terms. This emotional strategy works perfectly because most men naively assume that an argument is a logical exchange where reason wins. They respond to emotional attacks with logical counterattacks, completely unaware that logic is absolutely useless in the struggle they are actually involved in. When she lists your transgressions, she is not citing facts for a logical conclusion. She is creating emotional pressure specifically designed to trigger your reaction and make you defend yourself. It is pure provocation, aimed at destabilizing your emotional state. When she uses generalizing phrases like "you always" or "you never," she is not making factual statements. She is deploying psychological levers designed to provoke guilt and force you to submit. This entire behavioral pattern is aimed at gaining control, and it works only on the condition of your active participation. The entire structure of female argumentation collapses without your emotional involvement. Without your defensive reactions, without your desperate attempts to prove you are right, her strategy crumbles. She vitally needs you to engage, react, and defend yourself to maintain the power dynamic that serves her interests, as you become emotional fuel for her. That is precisely why silence has such a psychologically devastating effect on women who are accustomed to controlling men with verbal tricks. Your conscious and decisive refusal to participate completely disables her entire system and forces her to confront the hollow meaninglessness of her own strategy. When you meet female criticism with silence, you create a powerful mirror effect. Instead of receiving the resistance necessary to maintain emotional momentum, you become an absolutely smooth surface that reflects her own words and energy back to her. This reflection forces her to realize the reality of her behavior, removing the distraction of your defensive responses. She sees herself from the outside, without filters. She begins to hear her own voice breaking with anger. She notices her excessive emotional intensity and uncontrolled behavior, which was previously justified by your defensive reaction. She suddenly realizes how she looks from the outside when she does not get the expected reaction. The mirror effect is extremely uncomfortable because it removes the external target for her emotions, forcing her to remain alone with her own uncontrolled emotional state. She has to digest her anger herself, without the ability to shift responsibility onto you. This strong psychological pressure often provokes escalation on her part. She will try to scream louder, speak more hurtfully, to provoke the reaction she needs to justify her behavior. This is her last desperate attempt to restore the familiar order. But escalation, met by your unwavering silence, only exposes her as more unreasonable, more out of control, and more emotionally unstable. The contrast between her emotional storm and your imperturbable calm becomes screaming and undeniable, demonstrating her immaturity against the background of your mastery, gravitational presence, and the insurmountable boundary. Your constant silence during moments of her escalation demonstrates absolute emotional control and genuine psychological strength. You show that her emotional state is powerless before your inner world, and that her attempts at manipulation are incapable of destabilizing your center. You establish an unbreakable boundary that cannot be overcome by verbal pressure, all without uttering a word. Strategic silence transforms you. You become not a reactive participant in someone else's drama, but a center of gravity around which others are forced to revolve. This is a powerful redistribution of roles, where you occupy the dominant position while maintaining calm. Instead of being drawn into her emotional chaos, you become the stationary point around which this chaos is forced to spin. Your stillness, your quiet, becomes your strength, your statement. In this void of non-reaction, you force her to confront the reality that her emotional storms cannot shake the foundation of your character. This metamorphosis occurs because your silence radiates absolute confidence in your position. When you do not feel the need to defend yourself, you unconsciously signal that your self-esteem is so unshakable that no external criticism can touch you. It is a signal of your self-sufficiency. This unwavering, quiet self-confidence is incredibly attractive and magnetic, as it embodies a rare stability in a world of emotional reactivity. Being a gravitational center means that instead of seeking approval, you become the one whose approval is now sought. Your standards become the reference point. Instead of reactively responding to her emotions, you become the one whose calm emotional state begins to influence her. Instead of being under the control of her words, you become the one whose silence sounds much louder than her loudest voice. Your unspoken word gains colossal weight. This presence possesses colossal power because women are accustomed to predictable reactions, and your unpredictability completely disrupts their standard manipulative scripts, forcing them to adjust their behavior to your energy, and not the other way around. You force her to change her strategy of communicating with you. Your imperturbability is a direct challenge to her control, which ultimately increases your respect and value in her eyes. Taming the ego and psychological reconnaissance. Mastering this skill requires you to tame your ego, which desperately wants to be right, to be understood, and to have the last word. It is about deactivating the inner voice that craves immediate validation. This is the hardest step, to accept the temporary discomfort of potentially being misunderstood or even judged, but to refuse the need to correct the record and prove your rightness. You must consciously endure the pause while your ego screams about injustice. You consciously forego a petty victory for the sake of strategic superiority, demonstrating psychological maturity. He who does not need justification demonstrates genuine dignity. This is an inner strength that does not depend on external confirmation. Your self-respect becomes self-sufficient. Moreover, strategic silence, used as a means of psychological reconnaissance, allows you to gain a vast amount of information. Silence is an X-ray for others' intentions. People, in trying to provoke a reaction, reveal their deepest vulnerabilities, their key manipulation strategies, and their true intentions. You become an invisible observer of others' weaknesses, recording her game plan You begin to see the hidden insecurities that drive her outbursts, transforming your perspective from victimhood to analytical detachment. Your silence creates a vacuum that she is forced to fill, and often this filling happens with a degree of honesty you would never get in a regular argument. This shift allows you to dismantle the emotional trap she has set without ever stepping inside it. She gives herself away trying to break your defenses. Thus, you not only win the argument by not entering it, but you also gather priceless data for all future interactions. This information is invaluable for long-term understanding of the relationship dynamics and predicting her behavior, giving you a decisive advantage. The distinction, silence of mastery versus silence of submission. The key moment that determines your success or failure is the clear distinction between the silence of mastery and the silence of submission. This distinction lies at the core of your psychological stance. It is necessary to understand this subtle but crucial psychological boundary. The silence of submission comes from fear, guilt, or a desperate desire to avoid conflict at any cost. It represents an attempt to hide from the storm. It unconsciously signals, "I am afraid of you, I will yield," effectively capitulating to the onslaught. Women instantly, intuitively read this weakness and, as a result, intensify their pressure and manipulation. This genuinely passive behavior only encourages further exploitation of your insecurity. Your submission becomes an invitation for aggression for them. In contrast, the silence of mastery comes from inner strength, conscious choice, and absolute imperturbability. It is a demonstration of the superiority of the spirit over external chaos. It is active, non-reacting. It creates a psychological dissonance for her, where she expects a fight but encounters a wall of calm indifference. It clearly, though without words, states, "You cannot control me, and your emotional state has no power over me." By maintaining this posture, you prove that your validation cannot be extorted through aggression, but must be earned through respect. A woman accustomed to predictable reactions realizes that her usual methods do not work and is forced to either retreat or change her behavior to be more respectful. Your body is relaxed, your gaze is calm and penetrating. You do not yield, you simply do not acknowledge the importance of her claims. You do not fight the desire to speak out, but consciously refuse it. You do not suppress emotions, but choose not to react, managing your attention and energy. This demonstrates the highest form of self-control, which commands respect. This is the position of a person who sets the rules of the game himself. Long-term result and attraction. If you begin to understand that silence can be a far more powerful tool than any argument you could make, and realize that this power stems from deep psychological principles rather than superficial manipulation tactics, then you are on the right path, as you are transitioning from reactive behavior to conscious management. This mastery brings with it a multitude of long-term benefits that transform your standing in social and romantic dynamics. First, there is an amplification of attraction. Your strategic silence makes you unpredictable, and therefore more interesting, as most men are boring in their predictable reactivity. A man who cannot be easily controlled or read represents a psychological challenge that many women find irresistible. Second, you achieve the establishment of authority. Authority is not something shouted about, it is demonstrated. Your imperturbability in chaos automatically makes you the adult in the room, a natural leader to whom others turn for stability. This authority is based on your inner, unwavering strength, not on aggression or external displays of dominance. This creates a dynamic where peace becomes the baseline of your interaction, and chaos is no longer tolerated or rewarded. Third, this leads to a change in relationships. The long-term effect is building relationships based on mutual respect rather than manipulation and emotional games. Women who value psychologically strong and mature men will be drawn to you, while those seeking drama and control will be repelled. Your life will be cleansed of toxic emotional cycles, becoming more peaceful and constructive. Be sure to subscribe to this channel, Psycheria, and click the notification bell. because what we discuss here can fundamentally transform every interaction you have with women, forever changing the rules of the game in your favor. Remember, true power is not what you say, but what you do not need to say.